Dear devotees, all glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Today we're hearing from Bhagavad Gita as it is. Chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Text number 5. That knowledge of the field of activity and of the knower of the activities is described by various stages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First, he says, this is according to different sages. Quote, as far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, Krishna, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage. And in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parasara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham tvam cha tanye, we, you, I, and the various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we are falling into the wave of the three modes of material nature according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are in the lower nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the supersoul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature and is transcendental. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul and the supersoul and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parasara is considered principal among them. The word Chandobi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajur Veda, and describes nature and the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are two kinds of Kshetrajya, that means knower of Kshetra, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.9, Brahma Pucham Pratishta, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Anamaya, dependence upon food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then, in Pranamaya, after realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. In Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahmapucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entities. Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya. The Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying, Anandamayo Vyasat. The Supreme Personality Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Anamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. Brahma Sutra, Vedanta Sutra is the same thing. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras are aphorisms, are na vidyad asrute. That's one. And then another one, natma shrute. And then another one, and paratu touch shrute. The first aphorism indicates the field of activity. The second indicates the living entity, and the third indicates the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum among all the manifestations of various entities. Text 6 and 7. Mahabhutani ahankaro buddhir avyaktam evacha indriyani dasaikam cha panchaschandriya gochara icha dvesa sukham dukam sangatas chetana dviti etat chetram samasena savikaram udaratam. The 5 great elements: force, ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, and the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions, all these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. From all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. These are the 5 great elements, or called Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature. Then there are 5 senses for acquiring knowledge: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then 5 working senses: voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. Then above the senses, there is the mind, which is within and which can be called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are the 5 objects of the senses: smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now, the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. Then there are desire, hatred, happiness, and distress, which are interactions, representations of the 5 great elements in the gross body. The living symptoms, represented by consciousness and convictions, are the manifestation of the subtle body, mind, ego, and intelligence. These subtle elements are included within the field of activities. The 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception or tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. This further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhana. One who desires to know the 24 elements in detail, along with their interactions, should study the philosophy in more detail. In Bhagavad Gita, a summary only is given. The body is the representation of all these factors, and there are changes of the body, which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, then it begins to decay, and at last stage, it vanishes. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material thing. However, the Kshetrajya, the knower of the field, its proprietor, is different. Kshetrajya means the living entity. Text 8 to 12. Amanitvam, Adamitvam, ahimsa santa arjuna, acharya pasamam, pasamam, socham, staryam, atmanvinigraha. Indriyate suvairagyam ahab kara evacha. Janmramityu jaravyadi dukkata sanadashanam. Asaktiramabhisvanga putradara pihadisu nityam cha samachitatvam istan istopapatisu mai chananya yogena bhaktir avyavicharini vivikta desasevitam aratir jnana samsadi adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva janartha darshanam etajnanam iti proktam ajnanam yad ato nyata. Translation: humility, courageousness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, Krishna, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance in this world today. Okay, purport by Srila Prabhupada. This is chapter 13 and text 12. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. There is not the intersection of the 24 elements. This is not the intersection of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. That's good news. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of the 24 elements. And the process of knowledge is described here is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mai chananya yogena bhaktir avyabhicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So, if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 5.18.12, Yas Yasti Bhaktir Bhagavati Akinchana Sarver Gunais Tatra Samasate Sura. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th chapter, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. Well, that's the truth. The spiritual personality, the supreme personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others, but from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor pertaining to this body, is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently, sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following the religious principles and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. 1. Nonviolence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually, nonviolence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So, unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. Whoa. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is nonviolence. Number two, tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. Ah, very good point. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlada, who, only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlada tolerated him, his own father. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. Very important. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. As for acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him all services so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna. If he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advance without the disciples following the regulative principles. Or the regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath. But for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Oh, I like that statement. Look at that. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. In other words, cleans all past karma. What is that? It's chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'm going to stop right there because this is a very long purport. It goes on for another 2.5 pages. So I'll stop right there. Are there any questions or comments? Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, I have one question, Maharaj.
Yes, please.
In, let's see, text 5 at the bottom of the chapter where it says, if the living entity desires to, let's see, hold on. If the living entity decides to enjoy and dovetailing himself with the Ananda Maya, then he becomes perfect. My question is, can you explain Ananda Maya a little more and how we become perfect?
Okay. That is, 1 second. to find where that is.
Oh, it's text 5 at the bottom. Very bottom.
Can you read it again?
Yes. If the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as subordinate knower in the nature of the fields of activities.
Second.
Mm-hmm.
So is that chapter 13, text 12?
Text 5 at the bottom.
Text 5. That's right.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. She's talking about Anandamaya, Anandamaya.
So that would be chapter 13, text number 5?
Yes, all the way at the bottom, right before 6, 7.
Right before. Okay. Then, and it's in the last statements or in the middle or where?
In the very end, it says, if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. It's the very end.
1 second. Okay. That means if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. Okay, ask your question again.
How do we become perfect? And can you explain Anandamaya a little more and how the living entity becomes perfect? What do they need to do?
Okay, so Ananda means transcendental happiness. And Maya has different meanings. So here, Anandamaya is not negative, it's positive. That's why it says to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. So Anandamaya means transcendental happiness. So if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. So if we, this is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field. The living entity is the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. Okay, so that means very explicitly that when we begin to experience transcendental happiness, that is the beginning of us becoming perfect in Krishna consciousness. That's why it says if that means that if the living entity decides to enjoy and dovetailing himself means connecting himself with the transcendental pleasure or happiness of Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. Okay? So, to become perfect, you have to become perfectly happy in performing Krishna conscious activities in the association of genuine devotees. That's very important to see. You can't be miserable and be Anandamaya. So it says here, The Supreme Personality Godhead is by nature full of joy to enjoy his transcendental bliss. He expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Anamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. Okay, so you have these 5 statements. Excuse me. First of all, it says, the next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization and spiritual realization, which are called Brahmapucham. Of these, the first 3, Anamaya. Anamaya means feeling happy by eating prasadam.
Okay.
Then Pranamaya means that one engages in
I'm into. I'm the like into organizing committee. Oh. I will be distributing Bhagavad Gita. You can come and meet me there.
Mataji, can you put yourself on mute?
okay. So there are different levels of spiritual realization. Anamaya is the happiness one feels in having nice food. And this is the materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then in Pranamaya, after realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. That's called Pranamaya. In Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization. Brahman realization means spiritual realization, which are called Brahmapucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, the joy of having nice prasadam. Pranamaya is when, after realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. And Jnanamaya means when one let's see, wait, I'm getting lost here. Yeah, so after Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity itself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. So you have 5 different levels of realization of Krishna. And the highest one is Anandamaya, where you experience all blissfulness in the association of the Lord. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, 5 stages of spiritual realization, which are called Brahma Pucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, the pleasure of having nice food, Pranamaya, being able to understand uh, uh, the symptoms of life forms, and then Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Okay? So therefore, those are the first 3 levels of realization of Krishna and bliss. Then, transcendental to all these fields of activities, okay, so then there is there is Jnanamaya, realization that extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. And then there is Brahman realization, called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. And then next, and supreme stage, is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of spiritual realization or Brahman realization, which are called Brahma Pucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entities. Okay? Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya, the supreme happiness of engaging in Krishna conscious activity. Okay. So, do I need to explain it anymore, or you understand, Mataji?
That makes sense. So Anandamaya is transcendental.
Happiness,
Happiness is the highest.
highest level of spiritual realization. It's also called Brahman realization, where you feel ecstatic.
Mm.
It's Anandamaya is, or Brahman realization is the same thing. Realization of the all blissful nature when you are engaged in devotional service and completely surrendered to the Lord.
That you become perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Perfectly happy.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much, my dear devotees. I hope you all attain Anandamaya Vyasa. That means the Supreme Personality Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Anamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing or connecting himself with the Anandamaya, that means the transcendental happiness of Krishna, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra. So you have what's called the transcendental realization in 5 levels. First level is Anamaya. the pleasure you have in eating prasadam. Then you have pranamaya, when you realize the absolute truth in the living symptoms or life forms, meaning in relationship, that you have a relationship you have with devotees. Okay? And then there's jnanamaya. The realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing that's going on in your mind. And then next level, then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. That means that you have transcendental realization, but you got there by the mercy of devotees. That's why it says that it says Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. Yeah, that's because of the association with genuine devotees. And then the last stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahmapucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entities. Transcendental to all these activities, fields of activities, is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya, or the supreme transcendental happiness that one has by engaging in devotional service and developing pure love and devotion for Krishna.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
Yes.
I have a loose comment. Does Anandamaya also signifies freedom from material anxiety and a desire to serve the Supreme Lord Krishna?
Okay.
From your description above today,
Okay. Because you're
does that
because
does that equate to what you were explaining in Krishna consciousness movement, Anandamaya, to be equated with the Brahmabhuta stage? Does that make sense?
yes,
Okay, thank you.
Anandamaya means realization of the all blissful nature. So there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, spiritual realization. And that there's Anamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya. Then there is also Anandamaya, the supreme transcendental love and devotion for Krishna that gives you unlimited happiness. So there are different stages, 5 different stages of realization of the transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, meaning spiritual realization of the Lord. And it begins by Anamaya, by having Mahaprasad. Then Pranamaya, beginning to associate with devotees. And then Jnanamaya, in the association of devotees, you become educated in Krishna consciousness. And then Jnanamaya, you get knowledge, and then Anandamaya, you get transcendental bliss. Hare Krishna. Okay, we'll go over this a little bit tomorrow also. Thank you very much, my dear devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Chant Hare Krishna and